If you've mixed a track you love, but it falls short when compared to professional songs, that's actually a good sign. Your ears are improving. The problem is a lack of clear target. Mixing without reference tracks means you can't properly balance your sound. I will provide you with 10 top reference tracks and a repeatable mixing system using Tonal Balance Control 3 to ensure that your mixes translate consistently. This plugin is a sanity check for your ears. TBC3 displays your audio as a white line against a target curve representing a genre such as hip-hop, jazz, or pop. If the white line exceeds the target, it suggests too much or too little of a certain frequency, acting as a guide. While you can select from the genres, Tonal Balance Control 3 also lets you capture the sonic profile of any track that's playing in your DAW or favorite streaming platform. Simply play the track and hit the capture button to instantly create its target profile. We've compiled some of the most recommended reference tracks from a variety of genres and eras. While these are highly recommended, any track that you want can be a reference track, capturing the profile of that track that fits your particular style. I just want to add a quick disclaimer. Unfortunately, we can't play these tracks due to copyright, but they're easily accessible on your favorite streaming services, so feel free to follow along. Eminem's Without Me is a great reference for density and vocal clarity. Even with the thick bass and sharp snare and nonstop energy, the lead stays clear, forward, and in control. That's what makes it such a useful benchmark when you're working on a crowded mix. If your own track starts to feel cloudy or overloaded, check the dynamics meter in TBC3. Watch the white circle closely. If it starts pushing too far to the right, you may be overcompressing and flattening the movement that keeps a dense mix readable. That usually shows up first in the transients, causing the drums to lose some snap, for instance. The goal is to keep the energy and impact while still giving the vocal enough space and attack to stay present. Now let's move away from dense and aggressive to something a little sleeker, a modern pop mix that still really hits hard, but with way more width and polish. Charlie Puth's Attention is a great reference for modern pop punch. The first thing to listen for is the low end. The bass feels deep and powerful, but you can still hear the definition of each note. It never turns into a blurry wall of sub. That's a huge part of why this track works so well as a benchmark. In TBC3, check the stereo width meter, especially when the chorus lands. In Attention, the chorus gets wider and more immersive, but the center still feels strong and stable. So if your chorus isn't lifting, don't just reach for the EQ right away. Look at your width, your side information, and whether your arrangement is giving the chorus enough contrast from the verse. The goal here is a mix that feels punchy and wide. From there, let's shift away from modern pop punch low end and look at something a little bit more foundational, mid-range center and overall tightness. Eurythmics' Sweet Dreams is a great reference for mid-range strength and center image. When you compare your mix against it, listen to how solid and focused everything feels through the middle. If your mix sounds hollow or a little too thin by comparison, there's a good chance that you've pulled back too much of the mid-range that helps the mix feel present. What's useful in TBC3 is that you don't have to guess. You can use the built-in hybrid EQ right inside of it to make quick tonal adjustments without ever leaving your workflow. So if your mix is missing some of that presence in the mids, you can correct it immediately and hear the difference right away. This track is especially useful because it reminds you that a strong mix always doesn't come from more low end or more top end. Now that we've talked about center and mid-range, let's strip things way back and look at what happens when there's nowhere to hide. Lorde's Royals is a great reference for minimal production and low-end control. The arrangement is so stripped back that every element has to work, so if the balance is off, you hear it immediately. The biggest challenge is the relationship between the sub bass and the vocal. That's where Vocal Balance Meter comes really useful. Powered by iZotope's real-time stem separation, it gives you a clear visual read on where the vocal is sitting relative to the rest of the track. So instead of guessing whether the vocal is too tucked in or too far forward, you can actually see whether it's landing right in the right range. With a track like this, that matters a lot. Once the balance is under control, the next question is space. Not just how much reverb you have, but how deep and intentional that space feels. Frank Ocean's Thinking About You is a great reference for vocal intimacy and depth. What makes this track so effective is how spacious it feels without ever losing focus. The lead vocal stays close, delicate, and emotional, while the surrounding delays, reverbs, and synth textures create a sense of openness around it. It's a great example of how to build atmosphere that supports the vocal instead of competing with it. When you compare your mix against it, use fine view or leveled view to pay attention to the high frequency tails in your reverbs and ambience. If your white line starts looking too uneven or too exaggerated in the top end, that can be a sign that your space is getting messy instead of refined. In Thinking About You, the ambience feels smooth, controlled, and almost invisible, which is exactly why the vocal still feels so immediate. Use this track to check whether your mix feels open. The goal is to create depth that adds dimension while keeping the vocal present. And if Thinking About You is about subtle depth, this next one takes that same idea and pushes it into something much darker and more cinematic. The Weeknd's The Hills is a strong reference for contrast and the vocal placement. What makes it work is the tension between the lead vocal and the production around it. The vocal feels direct while the instrumental feels huge. That contrast is what gives the track its size. When you compare your mix against it, also use fine view or leveled view and look closely at the upper range of your reverbs, distortion, and ambience. If your white line gets too jagged or too pushed to the highs, your effects may be adding harshness and clutter. The goal is to create impact and atmosphere while still keeping the vocal at the center. Let's come back from the darker atmospheric world and go into a mix that's all about precision, polish, and tonal balance. Bruno Mars' 24 Karat Magic is a great benchmark for modern tonal balance. What stands out right away is how polished and organized the mix feels. The vocal stays front and center, and the top end has some shine without getting too harsh, and the lows feel punchy without turning too muddy. It's one of those mixes where every element clearly has its own space, which is exactly why it works so well as a reference track. A really useful move here is to switch TBC3 to leveled view. That flattens the target into more of a straight line, so it becomes easier to spot the problems fast. If your mix has a bump in the low mids or a dip in the highs, you'll see it immediately. And if something feels off, you can also connect directly to Ozone and Neutron's EQs from inside the interface and make tonal adjustments while looking at the reference curve in real time. This track is especially useful for checking whether your kick, bass, vocal, and top end are all working together instead of fighting each other. Once your tonal balance is in place, the next thing to focus on is definition, especially in the top end. Daft Punk's Get Lucky is a great reference for definition, polish, and top-end control. The track has a bright, glossy finish, but it never feels too brittle or fatiguing. You can hear the separation between the groove elements, the guitar, the vocal, and the high-frequency detail, but nothing feels exaggerated. And if you don't have a lossless copy, that's totally okay. With the new TBC3 standalone desktop app, you can play back the track from Spotify, YouTube, or any streaming platform, hit capture, and save the sonic profile for use inside of TBC3. And this profile could also be used in Ozone or Neutron. That makes it easy to compare your mix against a track with this level of clarity and finish. This is a great reference for when you want your mix to feel bright and defined without creating harshness. So far, we've talked a lot about tone and space. Now let's talk about groove, because none of that matters if the track doesn't move. Michael Jackson's Billie Jean is still one of the best references for grooves, punch, and dynamic control. The drums are a huge part of that. The kick and the snare stay present in driving the entire time. That's one reason this track still works so well as a benchmark. If your drums don't feel that steady or that alive, it's worth sanity checking your dynamics. Look at your compressor attack and release times, and check whether you're flattening the life out of the groove. You can also use the low-end crest factor meter in TBC3 to see whether your bass has the right balance of punch versus sustain. This track is a reminder that great rhythm sections don't just hit hard. They move and stay balanced enough to keep the song moving. And finally, we end with a track that's less about one specific trick and more about total honesty in your system. Steely Dan's Asia is the ultimate reference for clarity, separation, and playback honesty. This track is famous for how easily you can hear into the arrangement. The drums are beautifully balanced, the instruments feel distinct, and even in dense sections, the mix never really sounds that muddy. It's the kind of record people still use to judge speakers and rooms because if your monitoring setup is telling the truth, Asia will sound open, detailed, and controlled. That's why this is such a useful reality check inside of TBC3. Pull up Broadview and look at the 4 main frequency zones. If your track is sitting comfortably inside of the target range, but it still sounds muddy and crowded, or off on your speakers, the issue may not be your mix at all. It may be your room, your speaker placement, or your monitoring chain. So even if you never make anything remotely like Steely Dan, this is still an essential reference. It tells you whether your listening environment is helping you make good decisions or quietly sabotaging them. So after all 10 of these, the real question becomes, how do you know when your mix is actually done? One could say that your mix is done when it holds up next to these references on your monitors and it still translates in the car, on earbuds, or anywhere else people actually listen. Don't just use these references as creativity killers. Use them as a reality check. At the end of the day, the goal is having confidence in every mix and master, confidence that you know your low end is doing what it should, and confidence that your vocal is sitting where it needs to. Confidence that what sounds great in your studio will still sound great everywhere else. So if you want to hear what it feels like in your own workflow, you can try Tonal Balance Control 3 for free at iZotope.com. And if you want to compare your own tracks against any of the references we covered today, check the link below and start building your target library.